My parents refused to come take care of my 8-week-old son while I was lying in the emergency room after a multi-car collision because they were attending a fundraising gala before their vacation in Italy. I remember the fluorescent lights above me, the smell of antiseptic, the slow beep of a monitor that sounded too steady for how unsteady I felt. My wrist was splinted. My ribs burned when I breathed. Somewhere between the morphine and the cold vinyl of the hospital bed, I held my phone against my ear and listened to my mother say they couldn't leave their table. It was a VIP event. People were counting on them. My father's voice came in the background, calm, irritated. "You'll figure something out." I stared at the ceiling tiles and tried to picture my son's face, 8 weeks old, still smelling like milk and sleep. I could almost hear him crying through the silence of that room. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy stories like this. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love connecting with you all. Now, let me tell you what I did after they hung up. The siren kept screaming above me as if it understood something I was only beginning to accept. They loaded me into the trauma bay under white lights that made everything look unreal. Someone cut open my blouse. Someone else pressed fingers along my ribs until I couldn't hold back a sound. The pain was sharp but clean. It was almost easier than what was happening inside my chest. A nurse told me the impact report had come in. The other driver was intoxicated. He had run the red light at close to 70 miles per hour. Witnesses said he never even touched the brakes. I remembered the moment just before the crash, the way the SUV filled my windshield like a wall. I remembered the violent bloom of the airbags, the smell of chemicals, the way my body went weightless and then slammed back into itself. The blackness that followed wasn't dramatic. It was thin, quiet, like falling through a narrow space. They confirmed what I already felt. 2 fractured ribs, a broken wrist, and they were concerned about a possible subdural hematoma, a slow bleed, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it's too late. I lay there with wires taped to my skin and tried to keep my eyes open, but my mind was nowhere in that room. It was in my living room, on the pale rug near the sofa, Oliver's bassinet by the window, Mrs. Daly sitting carefully in her armchair rocking him with hands that trembled when she poured tea. She was 74, kind, responsible, but not built for emergencies, not built to drive fast or make medical decisions in the middle of the night. I asked for my phone again. My mother answered on the 3rd ring. There was music behind her, soft, polished. I could hear fabric shifting the faint metallic slide of a zipper. She told me she was in the fitting room trying on her gown for the gala. Something navy, something elegant. I told her about the accident, about the hospital, about Oliver. She exhaled slowly as if I had interrupted something trivial. "You always escalate everything," she said. "Are you sure it's that bad?" I watched a nurse adjust the oxygen line near my face. She added that Harold was at his golf club board meeting. That tonight was important. That their table alone cost $8,000. "We can't just abandon commitments," she said almost gently. My father took the phone. His voice was even, controlled. "You decided to become a mother," he said. "You need to learn how to manage the consequences without expecting us to drop everything." Consequences. The word stayed with me. I said Oliver's name again. Not loudly, just once. I tried to describe how small he still was, how he still startled at loud noises. There was a pause on the other end. Then my mother's voice came back softer but firmer. "We'll check on him tomorrow," she said. "Right now we can't cancel. People are counting on us." In the background someone laughed. Glasses clinked. The jazz continued steady and indifferent. Then the line disconnected. I stared at the ceiling tiles above the trauma bay. Perfect squares. Clean. Ordered. My ribs ached every time I inhaled. My wrist throbbed under the temporary cast. Somewhere beyond the curtain, a machine beeped in a rhythm that felt too calm for what had just shifted in my life. The accident had lasted seconds, but the refusal that lasted much longer. And lying there, I began to understand that the impact on Loop 101 hadn't been the only collision that day. The accident had lasted seconds, but the refusal that lingered in the room long after the sirens faded. I lay there with the phone resting against my collarbone, feeling the weight of what hadn't happened. No one was on their way. No one was leaving the gala table. The space beside my bed remained empty. A nurse adjusted the IV line and asked quietly if there was someone else we could call. I swallowed and told her yes, just not family. I asked her to look up an emergency infant care service. My voice felt smaller than it should have. She stepped into the hallway and returned a few minutes later with a number for something called Desert Infant Response. I dialed. A woman answered on the second ring. Her voice was steady, grounded. She introduced herself as Megan Holloway, former NICU nurse, now coordinating urgent in-home newborn care. She didn't ask why my parents weren't going. She didn't hesitate when I explained the situation. She just asked for the address, the baby's age, feeding schedule, any medical concerns. She told me someone could be at my house within 30 minutes. $95 an hour, she said, almost apologetically. I said yes before she finished the sentence. Money had never felt more irrelevant. I hung up and stared at the wall, listening to the quiet hum of machines around me. Somewhere in Scottsdale, a stranger was getting into her car to care for my son. Not because she loved him, not because she shared his DNA, but because she said she would. A different kind of commitment. Later, after the CT scan, Dr. Leah Bennett stood at the foot of my bed with a tablet in her hand. She was calm in a way that made you listen carefully. She explained that there was a small bleed behind my skull. Minor for now. But if I had gone home instead of coming in, if I had decided I was being dramatic, it might have expanded. "It's good you came in," she said. Good. I thought about how easily I could have brushed it off. How easily I might have listened to my mother's voice in my ear instead of the siren. They moved me to observation. The room was dimmer, quieter. My wrist was set properly, my ribs wrapped tight. I drifted in and out of a shallow sleep. At 1:52 a.m., my phone vibrated again. Nathan. He had already booked the earliest flight out of Seattle. He told me he was at the airport. I could hear the echo of announcements in the background. He said he'd canceled the site presentation, some major aerospace contract his team had been negotiating for months. "I'll figure it out," he said simply. He didn't ask if it was inconvenient. He didn't mention the money. He arrived just after 2 in the morning, still wearing his field jacket boots, dusty from a construction site. His hair was uncombed, his eyes red from travel and fear. When he walked into the room, he didn't speak at first. He just crossed the space between us and took my left hand, the one that wasn't broken. His grip was firm, warm. The monitors continued their steady rhythm, but something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet recalibration. Family. It wasn't the name on the birth certificate. It wasn't the shared last name on a holiday card. It was the person who boarded a plane without hesitation. The person who stood beside the bed at 2 in the morning and didn't look annoyed. Didn't look burdened. He asked about Oliver before he asked about me. I told him about Megan. About Desert Infant Response. About how a stranger had shown up within 30 minutes. He closed his eyes for a moment as if absorbing that. And lying there with hospital tape on my skin and bruises forming beneath it, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see clearly before. Not everyone who carries the name Foster stands beside me when it matters. And not everyone who stands beside me needs to carry it at all. Not everyone who stands beside me needs to carry my last name. That realization didn't come with anger. It came quietly. Like a door closing somewhere deep inside the house of my life. Nathan slept in the chair beside my hospital bed, his head tilted forward, one hand still resting on the mattress near mine. The room was dim, washed in blue light from the monitors. I couldn't sleep. My ribs pulsed every time I inhaled. My wrist throbbed beneath the cast. So I did what I have always done when things felt unstable. I opened my banking app. The numbers appeared on the screen, crisp and indifferent. Automatic transfers scheduled for the first of every month. $6,200. 84 consecutive months. I was 22 when it started. Harold's furniture business had collapsed after a bad expansion, too many leases, too much inventory, not enough demand. Bankruptcy would have destroyed the image they had built in Scottsdale. Patricia's charity board position depended on reputation. Appearances mattered more than balance sheets. They never asked me directly. But I understood the silence, the tension at family dinners, the way bills disappeared quickly when I visited. I had just started my career. I had savings. I told myself it was temporary. $6,200 a month. For 7 years. Over $520,000. Enough to erase the loans quietly. Enough to prevent foreclosure. Enough to let Harold retire early instead of being forced out publicly. Enough for Patricia to continue introducing herself as a successful entrepreneur at charity galas. Enough for them to breathe easily. I never put my name on anything. No acknowledgement, no paper trail beyond the transfers themselves. I convinced myself that love didn't need receipts. A few years in, I learned they had used part of that stability to help Kimberly secure the down payment on her $1.3 million condo in downtown Phoenix. She had thanked our parents publicly for their support. I had smiled from across the room and said nothing. In the hospital bed, I stared at the transfer schedule. The next payment was due in 3 days. My thumb hovered over the screen longer than I expected. There is a particular kind of fear that comes when you stop doing something you have done for years. Even if it is hurting you, even if it is draining you quietly. I pressed cancel. The app asked for confirmation. I pressed confirm. The cancellation felt smaller than I thought it would. No dramatic music, no shaking hands, just a soft notification. Recurring transfer ended. I redirected the funds instead. A new investment account. In Oliver's name? Long-term growth. Conservative portfolio. I typed carefully with my uninjured hand, the cast resting awkwardly against my chest. When I finished, I set the phone down and watched the ceiling. For years, I had believed I was buying stability, buying peace, maybe even buying affection. But lying there with a mild brain bleed and 2 fractured ribs, I understood something else. They had never known what I was sacrificing. They had never asked. And for the first time in 7 years, I did not feel guilty. Not when I chose my son. Not when I chose to stop financing a version of family that existed mostly for photographs and public applause. Nathan shifted in his sleep, his hand still close enough to touch mine. I looked at him. Then I looked at the quiet glow of the monitor. And I felt something unfamiliar, but steady. Relief. Relief doesn't come loudly. It settles in quietly like evening light fading across a room. I was still watching the ceiling when there was a soft knock at the door. Not rushed, not uncertain, just measured. Nathan stirred in the chair. I turned my head carefully, ribs protesting. Elliot Grant stood in the doorway. My grandmother. She was 78 and still carried herself the way she had when she presided over a courtroom, shoulders straight, chin-level, eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple gray coat despite the Arizona heat, as if the hospital air conditioning demanded its own formality. I came as soon as I heard, she said. Her voice was the same voice that once silenced attorneys mid-sentence. Controlled. Exact. I hadn't called her. Later, I learned Megan had contacted her after I listed her as an emergency legal contact years ago on a medical form. Megan had not been dramatic. She had simply said there had been an accident and that I might need support. Elliot crossed the room and took in the monitors, the cast, the bruising that had begun to darken along my collarbone. She didn't gasp. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. She placed her hand gently on my ankle, the only place not wrapped in tape. "I was told they didn't come," she said. "It wasn't a question." I nodded. Nathan quietly stepped out to give us space. Elliot sat down in the chair he had vacated and folded her hands in her lap, the way she used to before delivering a verdict. Then she told me something I hadn't known. She had paid for their Tuscany vacation, $18,000. A gift, she had thought. A celebration of their anniversary. She had transferred the funds directly to the travel agency 2 months earlier. "I believed they deserved rest," she said evenly. I swallowed. When I explained that they had refused to leave a gala table $8,000 worth of social obligation, her expression did not change immediately. She simply listened. Every word. Every pause. I told her about the music in the dressing room, about the word dramatic, about consequences. There was a long silence after I finished. Not empty. Heavy. Finally, she stood. "Stay here," she said. I watched her walk into the hallway with her phone already in hand. The door remained slightly ajar. I could hear fragments of the conversation. Patricia's voice faint but recognizable. Polished. Slightly irritated. "She always exaggerates," my mother said. "You know how Abigail is." There was no rise in Elliot's tone when she answered. "You just refused the most basic responsibility of a parent," she said. "Your daughter was in a trauma bay. Your grandson is 8 weeks old." Another pause. I imagined my mother rolling her eyes, adjusting her gown. Elliot did not argue. She did not plead. She stated facts the way she would in court, clear, final. When she returned to the room, her expression was composed. She dialed another number in front of me. "The travel agency." "Yes," she said. "This is Elliot Grant. I'm calling to cancel the Tuscany package under Harold and Patricia Foster. Effective immediately." She listened, confirmed the cancellation terms, accepted the penalties without hesitation. Then she ended the call. The room felt quieter after that. She stepped closer to the bed and looked down at me, not with pity, but with something steadier. "This ends now," she said. Not loudly, not emotionally, just decisively. And for the first time since the collision on Loop 101, I felt something shift that had nothing to do with bone fractures or brain scans. A line had been drawn, and someone older than my parents had finally drawn it. A line had been drawn, but it wasn't the only one. Elliot remained standing beside my bed, her coat still buttoned, her posture unshaken. The air in the room felt different now, less fragile, more deliberate. There was something else I had not said out loud yet. I hesitated, not because I feared her reaction, but because once spoken, it would no longer be something I carried alone. "I've been paying their debt," I said quietly. She looked at me without blinking. "For 7 years. The words felt clinical as I explained. The failed expansion. The silent understanding at the dinner table. The $6,200 every month. 84 months. Over $520,000. I did not dramatize it. I simply recited the numbers. For a long moment, Elliot said nothing. Then she removed her glasses and set them carefully in her lap. "They never told me," she said. "I didn't want them to look small," I replied. That seemed to settle somewhere inside her. She stood again, walked to the window, and stared out into the black Arizona night. When she turned back toward me, her expression had changed. Not emotional. Resolute. "Get me the documentation," she said. I handed her my phone. She scrolled through the transfer history slowly, methodically. Month after month. Year after year. At 11:43 p.m., she stepped into the hallway and called her attorney in Phoenix. A man she had worked with for decades. I could hear her voice through the partially open door, measured, precise, almost detached. She explained the situation without embellishment. When she returned, she sat beside me again. "I'm giving them 48 hours," she said. "For what?" "For a formal apology. Public. And repayment of at least 30% of what you transferred." I stared at her. "And if they refuse, then I amend my will." She said it plainly. Her estate, $4.2 million in property investments and trust holdings, would bypass Harold and Patricia entirely. It would transfer directly to me and to Oliver. Not as punishment, as correction. At 12:17 a.m., my phone rang. Harold. Nathan stiffened in his chair but stayed silent. I answered on speaker. My father didn't greet me. "What exactly are you trying to pull?" he demanded. His voice was no longer calm, it was sharp, loud. "Your grandmother just threatened us." Elliot leaned slightly toward the phone. "I did not threaten you," she said evenly. "I offered you an opportunity to correct your behavior." He accused me of extortion, of manipulating an elderly woman, of tearing apart the family over a minor inconvenience. I watched the monitor beside my bed blink steadily. Elliot's voice did not rise. "I am not destroying this family," she said. "I am addressing a pattern that has existed for 30 years. Silence, then breathing. Heavy. "You're choosing her over your own children," Harold said. Elliot's answer was soft. "I am choosing the only one who has been acting like an adult." The call ended abruptly. The room fell still again. I realized my hands were trembling not from fear, but from something else. Something unfamiliar. Protection. For the first time in my life, someone was not asking me to endure quietly, not asking me to smooth things over, not asking me to apologize for surviving. Elliot reached for my uninjured hand. "This is not revenge," she said. "It is accountability." Her grip was steady, and for the first time I did not feel alone in that hospital room. Not because my parents had come, but because someone finally stood between me and them. Protection has a strange aftertaste. It doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't soften the fractures. It simply creates space where fear used to live. By late afternoon the next day, the hospital room had grown quieter. Nathan had gone home briefly to check on Oliver and meet Megan in person. Elliot was reviewing paperwork with her attorney over speakerphone, her tone as precise as ever. That was when Kimberly called. I watched her name light up on the screen. For a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something in me wanted to hear her voice, to hear how the story had already been rewritten. I answered. She didn't ask how I was. "What are you doing?" she said immediately. "Do you realize what this looks like?" Her voice was tight, controlled the way she sounds when closing a real estate deal. "What does it look like?" I asked. "It looks like you're trying to destroy Mom and Dad's reputation. People are talking." The gala was a disaster after Grandma called. The word disaster hung in the air. I told her calmly that I had been in a trauma bay with fractured ribs and a possible brain bleed, that Oliver was 8 weeks old, that our parents chose not to come. She exhaled sharply. "You're exaggerating." They said it wasn't that serious. The old pattern, the quiet dismissal, and the money, she added. "Grandma mentioned something ridiculous about you paying their mortgage." I closed my eyes. "It's not ridiculous," I said. "It's documented." She laughed once. Short. Disbelieving. "You expect me to believe you've been secretly paying $6,000 a month for 7 years?" "Yes." There was a pause. A shift in breathing. Without another word, I opened my banking app and exported the statements. 84 months. Every transfer. Every confirmation. I sent the files to her. The room was silent except for the hum of the air vent. Several minutes passed. I imagined her sitting in her condo, scrolling through line after line of numbers that had never been meant for public display. Finally, she spoke. "You're unbelievable," she said quietly. Not stunned, not apologetic. You did this because you're jealous, she continued. You've always resented that Mom trusts me more. I felt something inside me settle. Not anger. Clarity. I'm not jealous, I said. I'm finished. Silence again. You're blowing up the family over money, she insisted. No, I replied. I'm stepping out of it. She tried another tactic, warned me that I would regret this, that cutting them off would isolate me, that I would lose everything if I kept pushing. I looked around the hospital room, the cast on my wrist, the bruising along my ribs, the empty space where my parents should have been. I'm not your bank anymore, Kimberly, I said, and I'm not their insurance policy. Her voice hardened. You'll regret this. Maybe, but I didn't feel regret. I ended the call. For a few seconds I stared at the screen, then I blocked her number. The action was small, almost mundane. A tap. A confirmation. But something in my chest expanded when I did it. For years I had carried the quiet expectation that if things fell apart, I would fix them. That it was my responsibility to absorb impact. Lying there in that hospital bed with the faint ache of healing ribs and the steady rhythm of the monitor beside me, I took my first full breath without calculating who else might need saving. And for the first time, the silence that followed felt clean. The silence after I blocked Kimberly felt clean. It didn't last. 48 hours passed. The way hospital time always does, slow, suspended, marked by medication rounds and vital checks. Elliot stayed composed. Nathan moved between the hospital and home, bringing me updates about Oliver in quiet fragments. He slept well. He took his bottle. Megan was steady and calm. There was no apology. Not from Patricia. Not from Harold. At exactly the 48-hour mark, Elliot stood at the small counter in my hospital room and signed the documents her attorney had prepared. I watched her initial each page with the same precision she once used to sign court orders. No ceremony, no announcement, just ink drying quietly. Her estate properties in Phoenix investment accounts, a trust accumulated over decades, redirected. Not to punish, to protect. She folded the documents neatly into a leather folder and closed it. It's done, she said. 3 months later, the consequences began to surface. I was home by then. The brain bleed had resolved without surgery. My wrist healed slowly. The ribs ached in cold weather. Oliver had grown heavier, stronger. He began to smile when Nathan walked into the room. Life moved forward. Then the financial notices began arriving for my parents. I didn't see them directly. I heard about them through extended family whispers, through the tone in Kimberly's texts, before I blocked her permanently. The mortgage on their house in Silverleaf, once stable, always on time, started slipping. Without the quiet $6,200 each month, the margins narrowed quickly. 3 months behind, then 4. Late fees accumulating like sediment. One afternoon, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I answered. Patricia. Her voice was different. Not polished, not rehearsed. They're going to take the house, she said, already crying. We didn't realize how tight things were. I listened. The house in Silverleaf had been her pride. The manicured lawn, the charity luncheons on the patio, the photographs framed in the hallway that told a version of our family story that felt curated and controlled. You've made your point, she said. Isn't that enough? I looked at Oliver sleeping beside me, his small chest rising and falling steadily. I didn't make a point, I said quietly. You made a choice. She began to speak over me about obligations, about embarrassment, about what people would think. I repeated one sentence. You chose the gala over your grandson. There was silence on the other end, then a sharper tone. You're being cruel. Maybe. But cruelty had felt different when I was lying under fluorescent lights with a possible brain bleed. After that call, other numbers began appearing. Aunts, cousins, distant relatives who had never once asked how my recovery was going. They spoke about forgiveness, about loyalty, about family first. No one asked whether the headaches had stopped, whether I still felt dizzy some mornings, whether the memory gaps frightened me. Their concern was logistical: reputation, property, appearances. That was when it settled fully inside me. If love collapses the moment money is removed, it was never love. It was dependency disguised as affection. I didn't say that out loud to them. I simply stopped answering. Nathan found me one evening standing at the kitchen window, Oliver in my arms, the Arizona sky turning orange beyond the glass. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded. Because I was. Not untouched. Not unaffected. But clear. The chain reaction had begun the moment I pressed cancel on those transfers. And for the first time, I wasn't rushing to stop it. 6 months passed. Time, I learned, does not explode. It erodes. I heard through relatives still eager to deliver updates, still careful not to ask about my health, that Harold had taken on part-time consulting work. Nothing public. Quiet contracts. Enough to stabilize what remained. He was 63, back in meetings he once claimed he was finished with. Patricia sold the Mercedes. That detail traveled faster than the rest. The car had always been symbolic. White exterior. Custom interior. Parked prominently in the driveway during charity events. Letting it go wasn't just financial, it was visible. A signal that something had shifted beneath the polished surface. They downsized some expenses. Reduced travel. Quietly withdrew from a few social boards. The Silverleaf house remained for a while. I did not call. I did not comment. I did not intervene. I focused on Oliver learning to crawl. On the way, his hand slapped the tile as he moved forward with determined, uneven effort. On Nathan teaching him to stack blocks. On Elliot visiting every Sunday afternoon with measured steps and stories from her years on the bench. Then, almost exactly a year after the accident, I received an email from Kimberly. Not a call. Not a text. An email. The subject line was simple. I was wrong. I didn't open it immediately. I let it sit in my inbox for 2 days. I wasn't avoiding it. I just didn't feel urgency. When I finally read it, her tone was different. Not defensive. Not sharp. She wrote that after I cut off the transfers, she had stepped in. At first, voluntarily. Small amounts. Covering a bill here and there. Helping with temporary gaps. Then she stopped. She told them she couldn't continue. And Patricia had called her selfish. The same word. The one that had followed me for years whenever I hesitated. Kimberly admitted that when she refused to fund another shortfall, our mother accused her of abandoning the family, of caring more about her own life than theirs. I think I finally understand what you meant, she wrote. She described feeling guilty for days, then angry, then exhausted. She said she now believed the pattern had been there long before the accident, long before Tuscany, long before the gala. She said she was sorry. Not in a dramatic way, not begging, just acknowledging. I read the email twice. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. I typed a short reply. I need time. That was all. I did not offer immediate reconciliation. I did not promise to meet for coffee. I did not pretend the past could be condensed into a single exchange of regret. Forgiveness, I realized, is not automatic. It is not owed simply because someone has reached the same conclusion you reached years earlier. It is a process. And sometimes it is incomplete. I closed my laptop and walked into the living room. Oliver was sitting on the rug, focused intently on fitting a wooden shape into the wrong hole. Nathan was kneeling beside him, patient, letting him struggle through it. I watched them quietly. 6 months had reshaped my parents' finances. A year had reshaped my sister's understanding. But something else had reshaped me. I no longer felt responsible for fixing what other adults refused to confront. I no longer mistook endurance for loyalty.